Hey folks, it's Tom, Frugal Prepper. So after my last video where I showed a little bit of my brake line stuff, I got a couple of emails and stuff asking me if I could go through some more of how I do brake lines and why I think brake lines are easy. Apparently, a lot of people really hate doing brake lines, and I used to really hate doing them too. And then they came out with this invention that changed my life. So this is Nycop brake line. I have more of it. I keep this in stock. I keep 4 or 5 of each size in stock. Because when you run into doing a car, seems like it always comes in batches, a couple days apart. I'll have to run all new brake lines throughout a car. In some cars, they just send one brake line to the back and then split it off. But a lot of cars these days have an ABS pump up front, and they have lines running to each of the 4 tires, lines running between the ABS pump and the master cylinder. The 2 most common sizes are going to be the 3/16 and then the 1/4 inch. A lot of your trucks and stuff take the 1/4 inch, and a lot of your cars take the 3/16s. And a lot of the cars will use 1/4 inch for the main lines going to the master cylinder as well. So this stuff bends and flares really easy. When you buy it, you got to make sure that you're getting the real stuff, because there's a lot of this stuff that is just soft steel with like a copper electroplating over it. So you need to make sure that a magnet doesn't stick to it. Well, that's stuck a little bit. They give you this pack of fittings. Those are magnetic, but the line itself is not magnetic. That's how you know you're getting the real stuff. If a magnet sticks to it, you didn't pay enough. So typically around $25 to $30 on Amazon is what this costs. If you're finding them for $13.99 on eBay, they're going to be the metal ones. You don't want those; they will rust. I mean, it'll take you a few years to rust through, but they'll rust through. This stuff does not rust. It's copper, which copper is illegal to use for brake lines. They used to use it sometimes back in the 50s and stuff, but on any modern car it's illegal to use it. But with the nickel mixed in with the copper, it is perfectly legal. And some of this stuff will say nickel copper, and some of it will say copper nick. The copper nick, this is copper nick, it's got a little bit more copper. This is the nickel stuff. The stuff with more nickel costs more usually than the stuff with more copper, but they're both fine. They're both DOT approved to use for brake lines. And it used to be there was a few holdout states like New York where you weren't allowed to use this. However, I believe it's 50 state legal now. And so this is really easy to bend. It's really easy to flare. It's really easy to move it around all the nooks and crannies. So what I do is I basically follow the path of the old brake line. I leave the old rusted out brake line in place, cut it on the ends, follow the path, and I zip tie this to it. And just run along the same path, and then I cut the ends out. I put the flare fittings on, and I put it onto the master cylinders. As far as removing brake bleeders, I have a great video on how to remove brake bleeders. Everybody wants to say like, oh, you're using the wrong part of the flame and all this stuff for the propane torch. Just trust me, it works. It works. I do it that way. I do it all the time, and it always works. But you can remove the brake bleeders if they're seized in. I'll put a link to that video. And so basically I just flare my brake lines. I normally just use this type of a flaring tool for most of my unions. And this is just a double flaring tool, right? And so basically you crimp it once with this piece in there, and then you crimp it a final time without that piece, and it bends the end over so that it makes a flare, like that. And I just have a whole bunch of these fittings that I've collected over time, and I have plenty more of them, but these are just all the different fittings. There's some metric ones in here, some standards, all that kind of stuff. And then I have these unions if I have to join two pieces of brake line together. For instance, sometimes somebody's brake lines will only be bad on the rear half. The front half looks perfectly good, like it's plenty serviceable, and I will just, you know, run the rear half of the brake lines. I'll flare onto their steel line and use a coupler like this. You don't want to use compression fittings. Compression fittings are illegal, not DOT approved, because they can slip off. I used to use compression fittings before I knew better. And then, you know, one day I knew better, and so I don't do that anymore. You want to put a flare on them and put a flare union. These little flare unions are kind of expensive. I just buy them in bulk on Amazon. And whenever I'm flaring, I do a double flare and a flare union like that. And there's some 1/4-inch ones in here somewhere too. Although I don't do a lot of trucks and stuff, so I don't have a lot of 1/4-inch stuff. And then you'll also run into, this is a little brake bleeder repair kit. This will allow you to basically drill out a brake bleeder and put one of these in place of it. But normally you don't have to get down to that. I got some of these special, these are some special Dodge truck ones that I had to buy at AutoZone, a special size. Then you also have your bubble flares. Now you can make a bubble flare on this. I'll put a link to my video and a link to Mike the Disgruntled Mechanics video, who did a video on how you make a bubble flare with the standard tool. It's not a perfect bubble flare, but it will get you by, and it'll work fine, and I've never had any problems when I've done that. But you're also going to want a bubble flaring tool, most likely, and that's this. And this just makes a flare on the end that's like a bubble that seats up in the bubble flare. So I don't know, it seems to me it's like most of your late 90s, early 2000s GMs, they switched over to all that isometric bubble flaring, and you have to have a bubble flare where you go into the brake calipers and that kind of stuff. Of course, when you're patching two lines together, you can just put a double flare on it and it's fine. But for some reason they changed over these isometric bubble flares. They are metric size, but the 3/16 is close enough or whatever that you can still use it. And this one's actually broke, and I got a new one in there. But now that's basically how I do my brake line repair. Like I showed in the last video, I do have a brake bleeder assortment. And basically what I do is when I run out of these, I just buy another one and kind of stock up. It's hard to find these individual sizes sometimes. But having an assortment of brake bleeders so that you can drill them, get them out, put a new one in is important. Alright, this is the other thing that I bought that was a very good investment. It saves me so much time over having to have the wife or the son come out and do the pump and hold on the brakes while I crack open the bleeders and all that crap. You just take this, you hook this cap onto the master cylinder, you add brake fluid in here so it keeps the master cylinder topped off, and you pump this up to, I usually go around like 10-15 pounds of pressure, and then I just go around and crack the bleeders open, and it works great. It really works good for flushing out a brake system. It has some really old nasty brake fluid in it as well. I think this was like, is it 50 or 60 bucks with the one adapter, and I think that is a Chrysler adapter right there. And then I also have the General Motors adapter, and this one does Ford and a lot of the Asians, a lot of the Hondas and stuff like that. But they make, you can buy like the whole complete kit with all the adapters for like 300 bucks. It's a huge time saver if you're working by yourself, especially. It just, it's a life changer. It really is. Because it seems like after, you know, you do all that work, you get all the brake lines ran, then you got to find somebody to come help you pump and hold and do all that stuff. And a lot of those really big fancy pressure bleeding systems can be like $1,000. But this works really well. I have no complaints about this whatsoever. The only thing that I wish this had was like a button or something to bleed the pressure off of it, so you didn't have to unscrew it to bleed the pressure off. But you know, that's something I can definitely live with. It's a very nice product. I'll put a link to it down below. You can buy it on Amazon. And I like I said, I bought it a few years ago. I don't know what the price is on them these days. But yeah. This is my Master Cool crimping kit. This is the hydraulic crimper. But this does the Jiffy type fittings, bubble flares, double flares. It just does them, and you just basically pump this hydraulically up, and it does it. It comes with a tubing cutter too. I mostly use this for when I'm doing like fuel lines, and I need to do the special connectors for fuel lines and transmission lines, or if I'm in a tight spot and I can't fit my regular flaring tool up in there, I'll use this as well. But it does take a little bit longer to get it all set up to do the flare. By the time you set up this tool and get it ready to do the flare, you could have done flare 2 brake lines with the regular flaring tool. So it's not a time saver that way, but it is handy to have it to do the fuel and the transmission lines when you need to do those. This is like, I don't know, I think this is like $280 for this kit. Another thing that I have, which really isn't brake related, but it's line related, is I have the Dorman repair kit. Let me see if I can get this on camera. Or most of it anyway. But this, I learned about this while watching one of Eric O's videos. But these come in really handy for crimping on all these type of fuel connectors, like for fuel lines and stuff. Comes with the barbs, and you can buy all these parts individually as well to restock. Comes with compression fittings. I forget how much this was, but it was like $300, I think. And then it also has a bottom section. I don't know how much line. I've got a couple things to line in here. It comes with a couple things to line, and you can buy this new nylon line. So a lot of times you got an old Chevy truck or something that's rusted out from the front to the back. I will just run some sections of this line from front to back and be done with it. But it's a complete kit. Comes with a bunch of instructions. I use it occasionally when I'm doing fuel line repair. It comes in really handy. You know, normally Dorman stuff's kind of crappy, and honestly, this stupid tool they give you is pretty chintzy for doing this, but it does get the job done. It does do it. So, you know, this has been a really handy kit to have as well, and I recommend that if you live in a Rust Belt state where you're going to be doing a lot of rusted out fuel lines, this is a good kit to have. Another thing that I bought, which has nothing to do with brake lines or lines, it has to do with electric lines, is this tool. I do a lot of electrical diagnosis, and a lot of times you run across wiring that has a bad ground, and rather than trying to replace that whole ground cable or whatever, or soldering end on, I got this guy. Bought this on Amazon. It works really well. Puts out like 8 tons of crimping force. But basically you just put the right size connectors in there, then you can pump this shut, and you can crimp down. Let me see. Yeah, then you can crimp down the lug on the end of the wire. And I have a whole bunch of different lugs for it, and they even give you these pieces of heat shrink, which I normally don't use. But you can put that lug on there and crimp it down. It'll stay tight, and you can get rid of some. You can fix some of those corroded ground problems right there without having to try to replace the whole cable or try to solder it. You know, you're out working in an alley in the cold. You don't want to solder it. That really comes in handy. And this wasn't too expensive. It was like 30 or 40 bucks, I think. And it works really well. So that's basically my brake stuff. Like I said, I'll put a link to the bubble flaring video, and I will put a link to the video for how to get brake bleeders loose. But there is good money in doing brake lines. It seems like none of the shops around here want to mess with them. Right? They're like, oh, great, it's another rusted out set of lines. I will take that work all day long. I will just, let me turn the camera around here. That's basically how I service my brake lines and my electric cables and my fuel lines and my transmission lines. The transmission lines and fuel lines, of course, if I have to put steel in, I just do steel line on those. Then I use my tubing bender. Those bigger lines are easier to bend without kinking them. Another thing I have for doing brake service, I do a lot of brake jobs as well. Just, rotors, pads, brake hardware, cleans, loop slide pens, that kind of stuff. This is a wind back kit for the wind back calipers that covers like all the makes and models, all the different pen styles. This is a really handy kit. It was like 20 or 25 bucks, and I've used the crap out of this kit. Before that, I just had one of these brake cubes, which this will work if you're just doing your own brakes at home. Don't even worry about that. Just get one of these little things for 10 bucks at AutoZone. It'll work fine. But when you get to doing a lot of them, that kit's a lot nicer. It doesn't slip out on you. It holds it while it puts pressure on it and screws it down while you're turning it, so it doesn't keep slipping out. But yeah, that's basically what I do. I do a lot of brakes. Brakes are just a good money maker. People need brakes. Shops charge a fortune for brakes. First of all, they're buying them from Napa or even from AutoZone or one of those places, and they're paying a lot more for them, right? I typically ask people what kind of car it is. They want brakes. I've checked it and seen that it needs brakes. I order the complete kits. I usually do Brake Motive on eBay or Detroit Axle on Amazon. I get the complete kit that comes with all the brake hardware. A lot of times it even comes with the rubber boots these days. Comes with a can of brake clean. Comes with a thing of brake fluid. Just comes with everything. And I just do a complete brake service. I charge $75 per axle. And I on cars and on trucks, I do $100 per axle. Because trucks are bigger and heavier and take a little longer. If you just want me to put brake pads on and you don't have the money for rotors and all that stuff, you just need a new set of pads slapped on, as long as it's safe and everything's working okay and the rotor has enough meat left in it, I will do that for you. It still costs $75 per axle, right? If I'm jacking it up, taking the tire off, taking it apart, putting pads in it, it's the same amount of labor. It only takes like 5 seconds to take the rotor off and put a new rotor on, right? I mean, so it's the same amount of labor even if you just want pads. But I don't like the pad slap things. I like to replace it all and have a nice smooth set of brakes. But I understand that not everybody has the money for that, and they're just looking for a cheapest solution as possible to be able to drive back and forth to work. And I will do that as long as I mic the rotor and it meets the minimum thickness. I won't do it if it doesn't meet the minimum thickness. I'll tell them, I'm sorry, you gotta have a new rotor. I'm not doing it because it's not safe, right? But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of money to be made. Shops charge a lot to do brakes here. I mean, it's a big money maker for them too. And a lot of people are just looking for a little cheaper of a solution, and I can provide that. A lot of shops here just don't want to mess with brake lines at all. They just, transmission lines, fuel lines, leaking lines, steel lines, having to bend and crimp, and they just don't want to mess with it. And so that can come to my place. I will take that money all day long because it's really is easy money. A lot of times, like the harder mechanical things to me are the gravy work because it doesn't require as much knowledge, right? You can replace ball joints and drive shafts and do brakes all day long. You don't really have to think about it that much. When you get into doing electrical diagnosis or drivability diagnosis, then you got to turn the brain on, and that works actually a little harder, and I charge a little more for it. But there's plenty of money to be made just doing brakes and brake lines. I wouldn't have a problem opening up a brake and brake line service shop. You know, I really wouldn't, because you know, all cars take brakes, even hybrids and electric cars, they use brakes, and brakes are going to be around for a while. They're going to stay hydraulic for a while. They're going to be the same braking systems we've always had. Don't be afraid to get into doing brakes. You just have to triple check, double check, make sure you tighten down every bolt. When you put your caliper bracket bolts back in, just put a drop of Loctite on them, just to make sure they stay in there. You know, just do it safe and do it right, and make sure they're tight so they don't come loose. Because there's some liability there. You're working on somebody's brakes, right? You want to do it right. Don't want them to have an accident. Yeah, that's all I got, folks. I'll talk to y'all later. It's Tom, your Frugal Prepper.